Politica presents Be Prepared. Simple Steps for Emergency Planning in a Volatile World, Politica. In today's world, we are faced with many uncertainties. No one knows when or where the next major disaster will strike, so it's essential to be prepared for anything. Introduction. Why emergency preparedness is important. The basics of emergency preparedness. The essential part of any emergency preparedness plan is to know the warning signs of a potential disaster and to have an evacuation plan in place. Next, familiarize yourself with the local emergency management agency's guidelines and ensure you have all the necessary supplies if a disaster strikes. How to make an emergency preparedness plan. Planning for different types of disasters. Creating an emergency plan. Developing a survival mindset. The top 10 essential emergency preparedness supply items you need. Emergency planners recommend having a 72-hour kit with food, water, medicines, shelter, and clothes. In addition, keep sufficient food and water on hand if you must wait out a storm or evacuate your home. Bugging out and evacuation procedures. This will outline what you should do in a disaster, such as a hurricane or an earthquake. What to do in different types of emergencies. How to stay calm during an emergency. Tips for staying safe during an emergency. Shelter and security in an emergency. Water and food supplies for emergencies. In an emergency, it is vital to have a plan for obtaining water and food. If you are in an area affected by a natural disaster or a terrorist attack, be sure to have enough water stored in case of an emergency. If possible, fill up plastic storage containers or barrels too. First aid and medical care in an emergency. The most basic first aid for significant injuries is immobilizing the damage and calling for help. Coping with psychological trauma after a disaster. Rebuilding after a disaster. FAQs about emergency preparedness. However, some tips include planning your safety before anything else. Find out what hazards might endanger you inside and outside the home. Get familiar with evacuation routes in case of an earthquake or other type of disaster. Create a family communication plan, etc. Once you know what kind of emergencies might concern you most, start stocking up on supplies that will help you survive those situations. Water filters, first aid kits, propane tanks if cooking is an issue. Resources for learning more about emergency preparedness. There are many resources available to help individuals learn more about emergency preparedness.